Welcome back. Before we talk about some of the divisions that occurred within the Restoration movement, I want to use this session to talk about two items. First, I want to talk to you about the leading second-generation Restorationist. Next, I want to speak about the emphasis on higher education and minister training, so important within the movement. The leading second-generation Restorationist was John W Mcgarvey. Mcgarvey, born in 1829, died in 1911, was an American preacher and academic within the American Stone Campbell movement. Weldon Bennett, a principal researcher on Mcgarvey, asserts, "No leader in the Restoration movement in America had a higher view of the gospel ministry, nor did any promote the training of ministers more than J.W. Mcgarvey." Mcgarvey was a student of Alexander Campbell, who preached and taught primarily in Lexington, Kentucky. His influence, however, spread far beyond Kentucky, and as both minister and professor, Mcgarvey was keenly poised to bridge Christian ministry with higher education at a crucial time in the American religious landscape of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, previously, I noted that although emotions and religious fervor characterized the Second Great Awakening and those Kentucky frontier-style revivals, the swing response, the pendulum response to the emotionalism, so much part of those things, was an intellectual urge. And this was best demonstrated by Alexander Campbell and his very cerebral approach to theological development, rigorous and reasonable in his approach to biblical interpretation. Now, the Great Awakening, remember Jonathan Edwards, may have vividly expressed religious fervor and high emotions. The Second Great Awakening in the American frontier strikes a more cerebral or intellectual tone. This is often the very way in which sequential movements occur. And we've seen that throughout church history. I would suggest a threefold explanation for the intellectualism. Number one, the Enlightenment inheritance, the byproduct of that Enlightenment movement in Europe. Second, a reactionary swing from both the New England Awakening and the initial emotionalism of the camp meetings. Third, the intellectual aftermath of the Civil War. If emotions caused us this much trouble and got us into a savage war that killed so many, then we need to be much more clear-headed in the future to safeguard against warfare like this. Well, thus, Mcgarvey's preaching could be described as subdued, cerebral, yet evocative. Mcgarvey believed doctrinal fidelity was a core part of being a faithful gospel preacher. His theology can be framed by four key doctrinal convictions. He was committed to the restoration principle, which, by the way, you should know, is referred to sometimes as the regulative principle. That's good for you to know. And his understanding of salvation, Mcgarvey's understanding of salvation, was more similar to Arminianism than Calvinism. So the hallmark of restoration teaching and preaching and gospel evangelism is going to be decidedly non-Calvinistic or Reformed. And we already knew that from previous sessions. Mcgarvey's commentary on the book of Acts displays his soteriology best, or what he understands about how a person comes to saving faith in Jesus Christ. Mcgarvey believed in corporate election, which asserts God elected the way of salvation or the plan of salvation, but he did not elect specific individuals. God predestined a class. He predestined all those who are in Christ. And this has been popularly represented as God predestines the plan, but not the man. And McGarvey believed and taught this. He believed election is corporate, not individual. This appears also, by the way, to be Walter Scott's understanding as well. But W Mcgarvey is also a major representative of this idea that God elects the church, but not the individual. McGarvey, like so many who will follow his lead, was very conservative theologically, rejecting the German Protestant liberalism of Bultmann and Schleiermacher. McGarvey evidenced a high view of Scripture where he affirmed the divine inspiration and inerrancy of the Bible. W Mcgarvey, I think, leaves an enduring legacy as a Christian scholar who labored equally well in the pulpit as in the classroom. As a preacher, he was committed to biblical scholarship. His ministry demonstrated the true purpose of rigorous theological study is exposition, the preaching of the Word. Theology, in all its parts, is nothing more than sermon preparation. The evangelistic commitment of McGarvey in the pulpit is best demonstrated by his activation of the hearers' hearts through deft use of the interrogative. That is, he utilized questions in the context of sermonic monologue to spark interest and advance his sermon thesis. And I think there's a lesson for us using questions, well-crafted questions, to activate interest and learning. So in your preaching and in your teaching, be sure to devote good time crafting thoughtful questions that will draw the hearers in to what you're trying to present and activate their critical thinking skills. W Mcgarvey taught for 46 years in the College of the Bible in Lexington, Kentucky. He served as its president from 1895 to 1911. And he summarized his position on the nature of the Bible. He said this about the Bible: all the authority and value possessed by these books when they were first written belong to them still. What a wonderful statement about biblical authority. One of his most enduring contributions was a commentary he wrote on the book of Acts. Acts is the Restoration movement's book. From the late 18th century, leaders of the movement have displayed a keen interest in the text of the book of Acts. And because of this conviction, remember, there's such an interest in the book of Acts because of this conviction that it is both descriptive and prescriptive. It doesn't just describe the early church. It does do that, but it does more than that. It also prescribes a model or a pattern for us to follow today. Published in 1871, McGarvey's A Commentary on Acts of the Apostles has been considered the flagship commentary by many Restorationists over the years, and its influence upon Stone Campbell movement ministers, especially throughout the first half of the 20th century, is simply incredible. It was a massively influential commentary. Let me now speak of education. One of the hallmarks of the Restoration movement is a tradition of emphasis upon education. Education was hugely important. In this time period, there is fresh and rejuvenated interest in higher education or specialized education. Hence, sending your kids to school became a popular dream. And it was not only now just for the elite or the wealthy, but it was possible now for even middle-class homes to find a way for their children to go and receive higher education learning. Let me mention two influential schools. Again, the point that I'm trying to make here is in the Restoration movement, in our tradition as a fellowship, we have education, and these schools become very, very important. In fact, we could say there is a symbiotic relationship between our schools and our churches. Now, sometimes today I hear churches lament, schools aren't doing enough to train ministers. We don't have enough good ministers in churches. Where are all the ministers? Why aren't you schools doing a better job of training our ministers? A common complaint I hear from time to time. The preacher training schools and the universities argue back to the churches. Well, you've got to do two things. You've got to help fund our program of study, and you've got to send us something to work with. You've got to send us your young people, and you have to send us some young men who will develop into gospel ministers, young men and young women who can develop into missionaries and Bible class teachers. So the churches need the schools to provide trained ministers. We want trained ministers, but the schools depend upon the churches for funding and to provide a constituency of students to help their program to continue. Well, let me mention two influential schools, again, in the early days, in the beginnings of the Restoration movement. Bethany College in modern-day West Virginia is really the mother school for all of our universities and all of our preacher training programs. It was started by Alexander Campbell. And the second school I want to mention here in a moment is McGarvey's College of the Bible in Lexington, Kentucky. But first, let's think about Bethany College. Bethany College was chartered as an educational institution in 1840 by Alexander Campbell. According to the charter, Bethany College was to be a seminary of learning for the instruction of youth in the various branches of science and literature, the useful arts, agriculture, and the learned and foreign languages. Campbell himself donated the land for the campus. He gave generously to its establishment. He served as its first president and was the primary instructor. Situated among the rolling hills of modern-day West Virginia's northern panhandle, Bethany has continued as a private institution of higher education focusing on the humanities for over 175 years. The model of education at Bethany focused upon the students acquiring a liberal arts degree. Campbell's paradigm of learning was of a classic or liberal arts education. Now, when I say liberal arts, this model is not to be confused with the notion of liberalism, as is debated in religious arenas and tends to question many of the traditional beliefs about the Bible, Christianity, and human origins. No. A liberal arts education is a language-focused education. It comes with the understanding that the person who has access to languages will be able to study the broadest possible set of disciplines. Topics studied include mathematics, history, and the Greek and Latin languages. Campbell actually never intended for Bethany to be exclusively a theological institution. Instead, he believed it should be a comprehensive institution, focusing on literary and scientific instruction with the Bible as its foundation. Campbell adamantly believed the Bible was the basis of all true science and learning. However, he envisioned students pursuing an assortment of vocations to come and study at his school, not just ministers. The second school, the second institution of higher education that I want to spotlight was the College of the Bible in Lexington, Kentucky. And this different from Bethany, was indeed a minister's training program, and it was led by W Mcgarvey. Now, although Mcgarvey himself experienced a liberal arts educational model of learning under Campbell, it will not be the philosophy he employs when he himself leads the College of the Bible in Lexington. In fact, W Mcgarvey will change this pattern when he called for more emphasis on the Bible and minister training. The holistic approach of a liberal arts institution will be a point of pedagogical philosophy wherein Mcgarvey deviates from his mentor. The word pedagogical or pedagogy just means the art of teaching or the science of instruction. And so Mcgarvey is going to take a little different tact than Campbell. Mcgarvey emphasized a focused program of study exclusively on sacred literature, the Bible, whereas Bethany is the educational fountainhead of the Stone Campbell movement. It will really be the College of the Bible in Lexington, Kentucky, led by Mcgarvey, where the mission of minister training will be brought to the forefront. Today, you stand in this great tradition of ministry training. And I want to encourage you to value this time of training and be encouraged that you are part of a great legacy of learning and equipping for the glory of God and the church, the body of Jesus Christ. Let's bring this session to a close. In our next session, we're going to talk about some of the rapid growth of the Stone Campbell movement and also some of the mounting tensions, which sadly will lead to divisions. But at this time, we'll bring this session to a conclusion.